Wrong button. All right. Again, good to see everyone. We are once again going to be looking in Proverbs tonight. We're going to be talking about in going through Proverbs. Oh, there's a subject, and if you grabbed a paper, you know the subject. It shows up more than once in Proverbs, and it's the subject of surety. That's a New King James word. The other translations, one uses the word guarantee. One uses, and actually, let's just read a few of these verses, and then I'll ask the question, what is surety? And so let me make it bigger for everyone. So we'll start in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 1. It says, "My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth, you are taken by the words of your mouth. So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself, plead with your friend, give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids." And I wanted to look a little bit further down in that passage, because in verse 6, as after verse 5, deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Namely, you need to get out of this situation. And then verse 6, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. So that was one of the verses for our first question. Another one was in Proverbs 17, around verse 18, where it says, "A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend." And then later on in chapter 22 at verse, let's see. Oh, it's further down, 26 and 27. It says, "Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those who is surety for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you?" So now I'll pull up the other translations. So look specifically at verse 26 and see if this is one of the places. So in the ESV, that verse says, "Be not one of those who gives pledges, who put up security for debts." The New American Standard, "Do not be among those who shake hands, among those who become guarantors for debts." And so, anyway, so all those verses kind of go hand in hand. And so we might just ask, what is surety? Someone explain what we're talking about. Anyone happen to look it up or anything like that?
If you co-sign for a loan, you become the surety for that debt if the borrower defaults or any other conditions um, are met. So you're assuming responsibility for somebody else's debt.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Rudy, for that. Yeah, that was a very good explanation. In my notes, I just put co-signer. I think Google, a surety is a person, entity, or legally binding guarantee that assumes responsibility for another party's debt, default, or failure to perform a duty. It's like you're the co-signer. There's different situations where this comes into being, but you can tell just those verses that we read, we're talking about financial matters, things along those lines. And so I just think it's interesting. I thought it was interesting because, all through here, and I won't make it bigger. Don't shake hands in a pledge. Don't be one of those who is surety for debts. And that earlier verse where it is, pardon me, where it's specifically that first verse, "My son, if you become surety for your friend, if you have shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger." So both friend and stranger is spoken about here. We'll talk about strangers with question two. For now, we're just thinking about our friend. And so it just seems a little odd. Why should we not become surety for our friends? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well,
Go
if
ahead,
we,
Pat.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Pat.
Friends and family
are probably the worst people you could become surety for. It
My
hurts
question is why?
relationships. It hurts the relationships because 9 times out of 10, they're not going to do it the way you think they should do it.
Okay. And I mean, you have this close relationship, and it's sort of like the old saying, and this isn't biblical, but you might think about how it might be a biblical principle based on some of these verses. Don't do business with family. Don't do business with friends. There may be a time for it, but you better tread real carefully.
Real carefully. Well, there's a reason that they can't just go to a bank and get a loan.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a reason they're treating you as a bank.
Uh-huh.
There's a reason. And so just tread carefully.
I
Nancy, what were
couldn't
you
say
going to say
never,
a
but
second
there
ago?
are probably times you should, but it's
Yeah.
pretty serious.
Nancy, were you going to say something a
I
minute
was,
ago?
yeah, sorry. I was just going to say that there's no reason to put yourself in any type of unnecessary risk, especially when that person, if they're capable of earning a living and taking care of themselves.
Yeah. And one of those verses we looked at, or it might be a future one, where it talks about why should you lose your bed?
Right.
Is somehow how it phrases it, either one of these verses or one of the future ones. And bottom line is like you're co-signing on their bill. And if they can't pay their bill, then you start getting into an issue. What if you can't pay the bill?
Mm.
And all of a sudden, who does the creditor come to? Like they come knocking on your door
Cosign.
because you're the co-signer and you've become surety. Um, anyone else have any other thoughts on this issue? Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
John, you could use saying underwriters. Someone underwrites your contract.
Yeah, and I mean, as we're talking about this, I mean, to Pat's point, sometimes people treat family like ATMs, or they treat, and to your point, they treat family like underwriters. And to Pat's point, there's people who do this for a living. It's called the bank. It's
Yeah.
called the ones who actually do underwrite stuff. And and I'll also say this: the banks have, hopefully, the banks have the means to do it. And that's what happens when banks don't have the means to do it. What starts happening to the banks? And that's when you start getting runs on banks. And everyone starts pulling their money out and they don't have the means to do it. Anyway, and so it's just tread carefully. Huh? I mean, here these words of wisdom are. I mean, you're dealing with friends, you're dealing with family, and you want what is best for people. And so it can be so tempting to say, you know what? Little Johnny, I think he's going to work hard, and so I'm just going to co-sign on that umpteen bajillion dollar car loan or house loan or whatever other loan. And man, a lot of times, you can lose your shirt, but B, you're not doing that person any favors really. And we'll talk more about that at the end. Anyone have any other thoughts on it? On why one should not be surety for their friend? It's a hard thing because they're your friend. So your friend comes to
Right.
you, Pat. Your friend or your family comes to you. And they're like, Aunt Pat, you're so nice. And, can you just co-sign on this loan for us? And because Pat is so nice, what would Pat like to do?
I'd like to do it, but I might not. I'd have to think about it hard.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just think really we have to look at, I mean, like you say, if they can't get the loan from anybody else, then why would they come to you because they're not going to pay you. I mean, and take that from experience.
And
It's
I,
just,
I will say there were rules about these things back in the time, back in the Old Testament. Um, I don't um I don't know all of the details of, you know, finances in the ancient world, but I do know by the time you come to the New Testament, there were banks. You know, I was writing an article for the Bulletin today, and in the parable of the talents, when he says, "Why didn't you leave it with the banks?"
Mhm.
But in the Old Testament, where this would be more common, where there may not have been banks. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce or Brenda. Well, Bruce and Brenda stuck their hand up, but I'm not. What do I do when they stick their hand up? Where'd they go? Bruce or Brenda, can you hear me?
Mm.
Well, if you can hear me, we cannot hear you, unfortunately. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that if I did something wrong. So in the Old Testament, there were very clear rules on usury, on things like pledges and lending, things along those lines in the Old Testament, where you may not have had, banks like we think of them. And so people would be coming to their friends and family and neighbors, and it's just better be careful. Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Isn't there a scripture about lending that says if you lend it, don't expect to get it back?
Yes.
In other words, if you can't afford to just wipe that out on you know, your
Yep.
expenses and stuff, then don't be lending it because, you know,
So that's
your
Luke
relation.
6 at verse 35 that says that.
Okay,
Lend hoping, however it phrases it, hoping for nothing in return.
right.
And so that we'll talk about that as one of the solutions to this issue, or one of the things to consider. And so, first one here, it's like you better be real careful. Just got a message from Bruce and Brenda. They say we can hear and see you, but last week they had new speakers put on the computer and the little pop-up just vanished. May not be connected to the Zoom app. So they can hear us, but anyway, technical things. Let's go on to our second question. So the second question, this comes from Proverbs, and again, that verse in chapter 6 also mentions strangers, right? If you become surety for a friend, if you have shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger. But then later on in chapter 11, down at verse 15, says, "He who is surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure." And so this one's pretty obvious. Why should you not be surety for a stranger? Like, you don't know them.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't know them. You don't know if they're trustworthy. They're a stranger. Here's my question. Why would you be surety for a stranger?
I have no idea.
And I mean, obviously, it does
There's all
it
kinds
does
of
happen. It can
situations in
happen.
life, though, you know.
Do what,
There
Pat?
there are a lot of situations in life that might pop up, you know, maybe one of your relatives or one of your close friends comes to you and they don't have the wherewithal to be able to help them, but they're asking you to help them, you know. So you may do it because of this mutual person,
Yeah,
you
a
know.
friend of a
You
friend.
may, but good luck.
And so I think some of the things that come into this, and we're talking about surety, we're talking about co-signing,
Mhm.
but you start thinking about, other issues involving, finances and things along those lines. And you have someone who shows up at church, okay? Well, they're just passing through on their way to someplace else. Their car breaks down. They don't have money.
Mm.
Will you sign on the dotted line for X amount? And you start those situations do
Right.
start happening. And just think about why would you be surety for a stranger? Well, one reason is we would like to be generous, right? And it's like we're supposed to be generous. That's we're supposed to be generous. You would like to trust people.
Mhm.
You would like to trust people, and you would like to think, you would like to think that people are trustworthy. And if you've never been burnt before, you think, yep, that's where we're supposed to be trusting. We're supposed to be thinking the best about people. We're not supposed to assume evil. We're not supposed to be surmising evil. We're not supposed to be doing those things. And so a stranger comes along and asks, "Would you please help me out?" It's like, and just the stranger says, "I have a job. I have a good job. I'm going to be able to pay my debts, but I need a loan for this. And I just got this job, right? I just got this job. So I don't have a work history. Now will you sign on this loan for me?" And I'll say this. I think what this starts running into is the Lord does not want us to be naive. The Lord doesn't want us to be gullible. There's nothing wrong with thinking the best of people, but at the same time be wise.
Sure.
Because again, if what we're talking about is you're co-signing, you're saying I'll pay that debt if that person can't. And bottom line is, if you don't know them, you don't know them. And that, so then back to our first question, even if you do know them, you better go slowly then too, because you can ruin a relationship. Have y'all ever, and I'm sure y'all have, when family starts when family starts doing stuff like this, you might have grandparents who have money and children who don't, things like that.
Right.
And they start getting in these situations, and whoo, it starts getting awkward real fast when you start doing business with family. And there's a lot of different issues that show up when debts start coming due. And anyway, just got to be careful. Questions or comments up to this point? Go ahead, Michael.
I would just say, remember that our adversary is always there. And,
Yep.
let's face it. I mean, the temptation that Satan can give us or give them to say, hey, go ask Mike for some money. He's got it, no problem. And like you say, they fly by night. They're gone. You never see them again after they get the money.
Yeah, sadly, pretty often. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's go on to our third question. So we're looking at Proverbs chapter 20 at verse 16 for this one. And this one's interesting. I think all these have been interesting, but Proverbs 20 verse 16 talks about what happens if you do, or how do you deal with those who are surety. So Proverbs 20 at verse 16. Take the garment of one who is surety for a stranger, and hold it as a pledge when it is for a seductress. All right, so you have three parties, okay? You have the stranger, you have the one who is surety for the stranger, and so the question is now, how are you going to deal with the one who is surety for a stranger? And what you do is you take the garment. Anyone have any thoughts on what it looks like that's talking about?
Looks like collateral, but that doesn't appear. You would take it from the one who's borrowing it from the stranger,
And so
the
so
borrower,
here
not the loaner.
so here's someone who has become surety for a stranger, right?
Right.
And now the question is, how are you going to deal with them if they need help? And Pat, I think you're right. I think it's talking about collateral. And again, they were very, very clear. Turn over to look over in Deuteronomy. I might put it up on the screen here in a second. But in Deuteronomy chapter 24, in Deuteronomy chapter 24, under, the New King James just heads it miscellaneous, miscellaneous laws. So Deuteronomy 24 at verse 6 says, "No man shall take the lower or the upper millstone in pledge, for he takes one's living in pledge." It goes on and it says, let's see, verse 10, "When you lend your brother anything, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. And if the man is poor, you shall not keep his pledge overnight. You shall in any case return a pledge to him again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own garment and bless you, and it shall be righteousness to you before the Lord your God." All that say, that's Proverbs chapter 24 where it talks about that. And so garments were valuable. Garments were treated as, they were using them as collateral, is what's going on. And so that first verse that I read there in Deuteronomy talks about the millstone. So the point that the Lord is making is this is their livelihood. If you take something that it's essential to them, that ain't good. And so you don't get to take the upper and the upper or the lower millstone. It's like, no, you're taking away their living in a pledge. And so they need that to earn a living, things along those lines. And concerning the garment, if you take their garment, you give it back to them by the end of the day because that's their only garment. We're dealing with the poor here, is what it's talking about. So you need to return that garment. But that verse in Proverbs, we're talking about someone who has not done what they should have done. They have become surety for a stranger, and they are doing something with a seductress. It's like, no. If if you're caught up in these if you're caught up in doing something you shouldn't do, uh they were the proverb says you take that garment. And it's like you need collateral. If you're going to get involved with this person, it's like don't get involved with them. But if you get involved, you better have collateral. Otherwise, it's going to be like a domino effect. One person can't pay, and then the next person can't pay, and then the next person can't pay, and on and on and on. And so, anyway, it's an interesting passage. And like I said, there in Israel, they had very, very clear-cut rules about these issues, about being surety, about giving pledges, and this was how this is one of the ways. And kind of back up and think about the forest rather than the trees. Pat, how should I put this? I need you're going to be you're going to be surety for me. No, I'll be surety for you. I don't know. Whichever way it cuts it. Someone doesn't pay their debts. Under the Old Testament, when a person could not pay their debts, what happened to that person? In today's day and age, okay, I can't pay my debts. What do I do? Well, we go to the courts, we go to
Oh,
bankruptcy,
bankruptcy.
claim bankruptcy, they wipe out all the debt, and then everybody gets hosed.
Again, you're probably stoned.
Back then, you weren't stoned, but what did you become? It's like, okay, if you don't have anything which to pay, you don't have anything, but what are you? You are valuable.
Mhm. So you
This
become
is how
a slave.
people became slaves.
I got
That's that's what started happening. I mean,
you.
that's what it was back in those days. This is how people became slaves.
Okay.
So anyway, just something to think about with all of these issues, but there were very clear cut rules. The last question tonight is, so what is the answer or the answers for all of these issues involving surety and probably some other things as well. What are the answers? Pat,
Well,
you've already given one. When you lend, how do you lend?
with the idea that you're not going to get it back.
Yep. That's one
I mean,
solution.
if you get it back, that's a bonus.
Okay.
But don't lend something that's going to totally ruin your life. If you're going to lend something, make sure it's excess.
Yep. Yep. There you go. What other things should be kept in mind?
Get collateral.
Okay. If you're gonna do it, it's like don't do it, but if you do it, but don't do it.
Right.
There in First Corinthians where it says, it's talking about if you were called while you were a slave, that's okay. The slaves could be Christians. But Paul goes on, he says, I do not want you to become slaves of men. It's like if you're in that situation, okay, make the best of it. But try not to get in that situation.
Right.
Try not to get in that situation. And so, some of the verses we've read, so how can we not get into that situation? So this scenario where someone wants us to co-sign for them. What do they need to do? If okay, they can't get a loan for they can't get a loan for a new car. They come to you and they say, "Johnny, would you please co-sign on a loan for me for a new car?" What should Johnny tell them to do?
Find a new loaner. Find another car.
You don't have to get a new car. Get a used car.
hmm
This is called living within your means.
hmm
That's the answer to this.
Mhm.
Owe no one anything than to love one another. Now, I'm not saying that all debt is wrong, but the American idea of, we're so buried in debt
Right.
where we have to have co-signers, and, younger people are getting their parents and grandparents to co-sign on houses and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, no, the solution, and that's why in that early Proverbs passage, I went all the way down to the passage where it talks about go to the ant, you sluggard. That whole point of going to the ant is you need to work. If, if you want this, what do you need to do?
Plan for it.
You need to work for it. You need to plan for it. You need to save for it. That's what you need to do. And if you can't afford it, then what do you need to do?
Leave it alone.
Leave it alone. It's like you're not you don't need it. The solution is godliness with contentment is great gain. And money going back and forth, and it ruins friendships. It comes between brethren. When brethren start co-signing for their brethren, and it's like, whoo, that starts getting real ugly real quick. What one of the other things concerning lending. Do you remember when look at our time when the wall was being rebuilt? So we're talking with Nehemiah. And one of the things they were doing, they were lending. It wasn't wrong to lend, but funny enough, there were rules about lending under the old law. And they were to lend, but what were they not allowed to charge?
Interest.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, you can lend, but that's called, I'm not going to make usury of you. I'm not going to charge exorbitant rates, things along those lines. They weren't allowed to charge interest, things like that. And so you start thinking about those different issues, and don't y'all think it's sad when money does come between family members,
It is.
and it's just people get so hurt by that,
Mhm.
and it's
It's hard to get over. I've had it happen twice.
yeah. And Pat, do you mind me asking, were you on which end of it were you on? The borrowing or
We
the
were we were the co-signer for a family member's home they were buying.
yeah.
That's one of them. And yeah, it caused some hard feelings when we saw them not making their payments and telling us the bank wasn't going to come and get their house. It was a mobile home. Bank doesn't want it. But we'd see the spending money where we thought if that was us, we wouldn't be spending that money. And it causes hard feelings. It causes you to think, man, why did we trust you to make these payments on this?
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
start having,
Yeah. It causes division. You can get over it, if you're not totally in love with money, but
yeah,
it's not easy.
when they come to you to ask for you to co-sign, and I'm not saying it's right, but you start looking at how they're spending their money a little more
You
closely.
do. You do. You watch them.
And it's just not a good place to be. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just really, and also it breaks the trust of
Yeah.
the family. I mean, you can't trust so and so, this is my son, this is my daughter. Why are you doing this to me? And it becomes really, really brutal.
Yeah. And you start thinking about, all the things the Lord said about money,
Hmm.
that a man's, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And when family or friends or strangers, when they, the sad thing is they're looking for surety, and a lot of times what they're doing is they're just using you.
Exactly.
And that's a sad thing to just be used and abused. And so the answer is work hard, work, be content with what you have. If you're able to help, feel free to help, lend expecting nothing in return, be generous, but live within your means. And anyway, go ahead, Pat.
Without getting into details, the second instance of that, when these people that we loaned money to, specifically just loaned them money, they were supposed to pay it back, and they got to where they could not pay it back, and they started resenting us, saying that we didn't need the money anyway.
Yeah,
It was our money.
yeah,
So, like I said, it can really come between family and friends.
yeah. And
That was family.
it's just, it's just sad.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, anyone have any other comments on it? Any questions or comments? They're just difficult situations. And so, you think as the writer of Proverbs, and I'll also say this, uh, who usually, who do they come to co-sign? Would you come to Lily, just to use Lily as an example, would you come to Lily to co-sign for a loan for you?
No,
No. Well, why not?
she doesn't have
Because
anything.
she's 18, she ain't got no money. Who do you come to co-sign?
A responsible person.
A responsible person who has the means. How many people do you think Solomon had leeching onto him? Yeah.
It's like somebody said they didn't need a DNA test. All they had to do is win the lottery. They'd find all their relatives.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They start coming out of the woodwork. So, anyway. All right, well, that's everything I had. Appreciate everyone being on here this evening. Kind of a different topic for tonight. Hope y'all stay safe throughout the week. Hope to see you on Wednesday. Y'all take care.
Thank you,
Okay, John,
John.
thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.